So, it's 2014 and a Gundam wannabe is airing that everyone's talking about. Considering I need a quick mecha fix cause Unicorn ended, and we're still half a year away from IBO showing how to handle an emotionless OP protagonist and a princess the right way, I'm totally on board. But I wasn't expecting to like it as much as I did. The animation and incredible soundtrack was carrying this otherwise mediocre show across the finish line. But it's exactly what I needed at the time. I was studying in Japan, where things were a little hectic. There was fighting in Parliament because they allowed war again. They forced it through while riding a wave of anti-Chinese sentiment. But it was okay though, cause I was going to study in China, where things were getting a little hectic. The government was forcing national unity, and part of it was riding a wave of anti-Japanese sentiment. Both sides claimed that it was because of history.
Tori?
Hi.
I had gotten used to watching Chinese and Japanese students explain the most basic things about their homes to each other, and I'd also gotten used to where the conversations always ultimately ended up.
悲しいですね。一緒に反映することができないなんて。
そんなことはありません。ちゃんと考えて努力すれば可能です。
そうなのですか？
はい。共に反映することはできるんです。
So, what exactly was that history?
我らバース帝国の神はこの旧人類の非道に対して断固正義の鉄槌を下さねばならない。誇り高き火星の騎士たちよ、いざ時は来た。歴代の悲願たる地球降下の大任、気をもって今こそ果たすべし。
It's 1931, and the Kwantung Army staged a terror attack to justify the invasion of China. The whole of Manchuria was lost before any Chinese even knew they were at war.
なぜそこまでして地球と戦われるのですか？
領主として領地を広げるために戦うのは領民に対する務めだ。
それだけのために。
祖国バースはアルドノアによって科学文明だけは発達したものの、文化は何も育っておらぬ。この豊かな資源に恵まれた星を手にせぬ理由はない。
It's the 1937 territorial expansion into China for resources required to cultivate civilization. Although Aldnoah Zero provides commentary on the nature of war and the problems of aristocracy and government, the show is pretentious on the former and leaves the latter unresolved entirely. Despite the failure of what appears to be its main premises, the show does explore an important point regarding how positions of power can manipulate the truth, and we can explore this through a single question.
空も青くて海も青いと言うけれど、前から不思議だったんです。地球では水や空気に青い色がついているんでしょうか？
いえ、水や空気は透明です。ただそれが大量に積み重なると光の屈折とかありまして、青い色に見える。
The show's setting is ripped directly from the history books, and not just the overt examples provided earlier. Even smaller details, like how Tanegashima is the first location the Earth witnesses the overwhelming power of the cataphracts. In reality, it's where the Japanese first witnessed the overwhelming power of firearms. But the content of history books has always been a point of contention. In 2000, the Japanese government approved a series of textbooks that challenged that Japan was an aggressor during the 30s. And although it only captured 1% of the textbook market, it was just one of many attempts. The Appa hotel chain offers all guests a revised history textbook which refutes the invasions and denies the Nanking Massacre. And as far back as 1965, the Ministry of Education has been censoring textbooks that are critical of the Empire's actions. We're introduced to Princess Salem as someone who's torn between two interpretations of history. Her upbringing left out the actions committed against those still on Earth, something she only learns because she extends friendship towards someone from there. When she asks her fellow Martians, she gets this.
私たちとて遡ればあの青い星から旅立った移民の末裔。なぜそこまで彼らを忌み嫌うのでしょう。 恐れながら初代バース皇帝がアルドノアの意向を受け継いでより、我ら帝国の臣民は地球に残った旧人類とは一線を画す種族となったのです。
Her friendship is the only way she learns that her history is incomplete. And this show is the only way some Japanese children discovered the same thing. The more references the show makes, the more likely a child is to become curious about the other events in the show. In 2001, the government-run NHK aired a documentary on comfort women, but behind the scenes, political pressure had forced it to be censored. But by this point in 2014, the newly appointed leader of the NHK went on the record to say that comfort women were common in any country at war. The appointment was praised by Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who, during his first term as PM in 2007, proclaimed that there was no evidence it even happened. The nationalists have spent decades using their positions to influence what gets reported as the truth. When a politician stands up and says something vile, they aren't the one that has to deal with it.
もし火星人だと分かったら、あの人がどうなるか分からない。
優しいのね。敵の心配をするの。
敵はあの人じゃない。
So I'm talking to my friend on a bus in China, and everyone's glaring at us. I'm used to it because, you know, white guy in rural China. But then I hear something. I immediately recognize that it's not me they're looking at. It's my friend. I hear it again. Demon speak. A common way to refer to Japanese. My friend looks at me in a way that conveys, I'm used to it, cause, you know.
そして荒れ果てた火星の大地を開拓した者が次に求めたのが地球です。光を屈折し、海と空が青く見えるほどたくさんの水と空気を持つ私たち人類発祥の地。
I can remember seeing my Japanese friend start to combine the history she learned from Japanese and Chinese people alike.
それは違います。空が青いのは屈折じゃなくて、レイリー産卵の影響です。
でも光の屈折だとスレインが。
空が青いのはレイリー産卵。その人の勘違いです。
So, when she asks Martians about history, she doesn't get the truth. So why does she assume that when he asked someone, he did get the truth? And why did he never figure out the truth eventually like she did? At first, it's because he can't. He's stuck in a society that abuses him. But eventually, when he chooses to ascend the ranks of that society, we learn that it's because he doesn't want to. He doesn't want to see if he's correct, when he can make himself correct. When we're introduced to Princess of Salem, we witness her through the gaze of her antagonist, a man who never sought to see if what he understood was the truth. Why should he, when he can achieve a position of power that lets him decide what the truth is?
私は地球で鳥を見ました。
姫様。
あなたは教えてくれましたよね。人と自然は地球とバースは共に栄えることができると。
はい、その通りです。確かにそのように申しました。
Just as she can eventually marry a fellow Martian and remain culturally sensitive to Earthlings because of knowing him and others, he can be an Earthling abused by an empire that brings horror and tragedy once he controls an empire. The show isn't just about how we devolve into extremism, it's about how extremism devolves us. So because of the circumstances he was trapped in, he decides on controlling that empire and wielding its power. She was able to break free and see more perspectives, while his became more and more restricted by revisionism. A final historical example: the Korean second-class citizen who served Imperial Japan, Park Chung-hee, who became Korea's most brutal dictator. And a final anecdote. I'm grabbing lunch with my language tutor as a thank you for the out-of-class help she always provided me with. Unlike some of the other teachers, she never showed interest in my time in Japan, but I could never tell if it was because she was also anti-Japanese and chose not to be rude about it, or if she wasn't interested. But she brought it up this time. She asked how I felt about rising anti-Japanese rhetoric in the Chinese government. Considering I didn't feel like making enemies, I tried to brush it off by saying I thought it was funny that they pretend to hate someone while simultaneously copying their playbook. I kind of assumed she wouldn't get what I meant, but her face lit up, and she started laughing, and said, "It's true. Maybe they should thank Japan. Without them, they couldn't have taken power." So it's 2015. I'm studying in the US, where things are getting a little hectic. And the Gundam wannabe just finished airing, and everyone's complaining about it. And since we're still a couple of months away from IBO showing us how to handle commentary on war and criticism of the aristocracy the right way, I loved it. Cause when I hear that soundtrack, I remember my friends. And despite maybe never seeing them again, I know we're each doing what we can.
どこまでも続く青い空と海。なんと美しい。
空が青いのはレイリー産卵によるものだそうです。
お詳しいですね。
以前地球を訪れた際に親しくなった地球の方から教えていただきました。美しい思い出です。